Between the ongoing and increasingly frequent albums, archive releases and occasional alias recordings, including a pair of recent vinyl album releases, Dougans and Cobain kept themselves busy with various other projects including reissues, remixes, compilation tracks, broadcasts with touched music and various other bits and bobs. And that's exactly what we'll be looking at this week as we approach the middle of 2016 on Earthbeat Visions, A History of the Future Sound of London. And we'll start with Touched Music FSOL Night 2, the 2nd of April 2016. Just under a year after the first Touched Music FSOL Night of Mixler, Martin Bolton came back with another bunch of classics remixes, exclusives, and the first play of the FSOL track from the third and final Touched compilation due later in the year. Martin and Touched were beginning to be key players in the distribution of FSOL to fans. As for the previous broadcast, fans gathered on the Mixler page to chat and discuss the music as it played. Martin had some alcohol in and dedicated himself to playing for as long as he could, and longer. He fell asleep before his playlist ended, and even picked up for 3 more hours the following morning. The show was recorded and shared as bootleg, although some of the Friday morning set was lost. First unheard music for the broadcast comes in the form of an exclusive 15-minute mix by FSOL. This appeared a few days later on the FSOL SoundCloud. It opens with a clip from a documentary about innovative dance music from the early 90s, including a band set to spearhead the movement called The Future Sound of London. This is followed by a gurgling synth environment, along with Among Myself scanner samples, followed by Gaz speaking in an early 90s interview about how they use samples. The then unreleased Bolton is the first full track of the mix. A mixture of crow calls and 3D Headspace tour era environments follows, with answerphone recordings over the top. Still unknown pieces next, with melancholic piano notes, guitar textures and more answerphone messages. An unreleased percussive track with gurgling sounds and acoustic bass follows, more than a hint of the Lifeforms Path single about it. The track includes the unfucked with answerphone message as heard over the end of Factories and Assembly. It's always frustrating to know that there are tracks like this out there unreleased, but given just how many archive pieces there are, it has to be expected. I'm lucky enough to have seen just a portion of how many archive pieces still remain unreleased, and this has resigned me to the fact that I will never hear everything. Up next is Offers on the Table, a track that will remain unreleased for almost 4 years, giving an idea of just how far ahead material is sometimes recorded, and how in the FSOL digital era the idea of new and old material is a very nebulous concept. Hidden Signs' outer environment leads into further answerphone messages. The acoustic guitar outro from Dead Skin Cells appears in raw, clean form, has a wonderful little snippet, and the 1994 Mixing It interview reappears once more, with the mix closing on Mains Interrupt. The rest of the show is, as with the first broadcast, a mixture of album tracks, single tracks, rarities, and unreleased pieces provided by Brian. The first unreleased piece is 11 Hot Nines, a track that had leaked a few years earlier and also appeared on a library music collection, but appears here in official capacity for the first time. The date of the track is unknown, but it's likely to be Tales of Everdrina era. The second came as a big surprise to long-time fans, the long-awaited Supergrass remix as discussed in 1997 interviews. Unsurprisingly, it sounds very much like a track from the 97 sessions, with raw breakbeats, electric guitars, distorted synths and a general psych-tinged electronic rock sound. It's a track nobody really expected to ever hear, and is unlikely to get any sort of official release, so the bootleg remains the only place to find the track. It's not a classic remix, but acts as another piece to the 1997 jigsaw. The third unreleased piece is another ambient drone track with an answerphone collage on top. How they continually have more unheard messages to include is baffling. As a brief aside, Cold Dark Field made its first non-covert appearance here, with official confirmation that yes, it's an FSOL track, followed by even more answerphone messages. If you had an answer machine in the 90s and ever found yourself going to get new tapes only to discover a shortage, you know who to blame. The next unreleased track is the oddly named Pitch, a slightly lo-fi, funky track written and recorded in 1991, something Gaz claimed was recorded for a porn film made by his friend. Given later claims of FSOL causing impotence, this is particularly amusing. Brian has later elaborated that this was a little bit of a tall tale. Algae Floats the Water in Super Technicolor, a Dan Pemberton collaboration, is one of those tracks that skirts the line between FSOL and Amorphous. Actually, had it not been confirmed to be an FSOL track, there's no way you'd think this piece, with its distorted bass, live-sounding drums, piano and cheeky chord sequence, was anything other than a follow-up to Mr. Sponge's groovy oscillations. Arc City reappears from the first Touched mix. Alternate takes of the stereo MCs and Brian Ferry remixes follow, but neither is drastically different to the final versions. The stereo MCs mix includes vocals from the original in contrast with the final instrumental mix. Lizard Crawl is present as decreed by law. The first appearance of Nightscape is here, Martin explaining how Brian's father was diagnosed with cancer while the track was being worked on, making its inclusion on Macmillan Cancer Support Funding compilation Touch 3 particularly poignant. At the 2-hour mark, there's a drum and bass track which sounds totally unlike any other FSOL piece, so much so it's quite remarkable. Martin lost the title, adding to the track's mystery. Jazzy chords and weird sounds feature over the top of D&B beats, making it pretty FSOL-ish despite not sounding remotely FSOL-ish. The You Are Destined for Great Things sample from the Dead Cities tour features as an identifier of the era and confirmation that this is indeed FSOL. Another totally unexpected track comes in the form of an FSOL remix of The Jams' It's Crim Up North. No context exists for this track, although Brian's a big fan of Corty and Drummond. Given the amount of bootleg remix collections of KLF tracks that go around, one of which even I've contributed to myself, I'm still hoping this comes out in some form or another one day. It's not long after this that Martin fell asleep, and once the original 5-hour set finished, the entire thing started again. After the playlist had run its course, he woke up and started DJing again, throwing in a few new tunes that Brian had sent over in the morning, including the fittingly titled Morning Mist, which later reappeared on a library music release, and Ever Really Happened, which not only remains unreleased, but unrecorded, so very few people have heard that. The final hour was recorded and has been shared. Among the new tracks here is Oshia, released later from the Archives Volume 9, and Obelisk, a gorgeous, melancholic synth track that's unlike anything the band had released up to this point. With a look forward to upcoming tracks, a bunch of unreleased archive pieces, and a lot of interesting discussion, the night and the following morning was a wonderful point where FSOL felt as exciting, as relevant as they had in years. The Future Sound London Accelerator 25th Anniversary Edition. Release date 16th of April 2016, LP, 24th of June 2016, CD. I suppose 15 years is long enough for Jumpin' and Pumpin' to sit on their biggest cash cow without a reissue. For Accelerator's 25th anniversary, a new deluxe edition was prepared on heavyweight vinyl with a new remixed cover, 500 copies coming in an exclusive 7-inch. There was a general shrug from the fanbase until it was announced that the 7-inch was to include an unreleased take of Stolen Documents. I really like the fact that not only does the reissue sleeve misspell Central Industrial as Central Industrail as per the original release, but the promo postcard does exactly the same. There comes a point when the chaos of FSOL typography stops being a nightmare and starts becoming a joy. A handful of copies were sold from FSOL Digital, with a wider release of the album without the bonus 7-inch doing the rounds shortly afterwards. A couple of months later, a CD edition featuring the 2 7-inch tracks was then released in June. Both CD and LP editions feature new artwork on the vinyl inner sleeve and in the CD booklet in the manner of the most important moments of a life book, with a montage of artwork, reviews, interviews and photographs of original tapes. Both editions feature the 1991 Freaky Deek, Earthbeat and FSOL Pyramid logos, as well as Jumpin' and Pumpin' 25th Anniversary 1991 to 2016 icon. The back of the CD booklet features the buggy graphic from the original sleeve, as well as the usual herd killing, curves and EBV logos. Future Sound London, Papua New Guinea, Stolen Documents. Release date 16th April 2016, first edition, 29th August 2020, second edition. A small number of the Accelerator 25th Anniversary Edition bonus 7-inches were released separately, creating a new collector's item. And for 2020's Record Store Day, this release was reissued with full label artwork, in tribute to Andrew Weatherall, who died earlier in the year. Stolen Documents Accelerated Mix. An alternate take of Stolen Documents. There's more emphasis on the jazzy elements as well as an acidic bass line, which are both pluses. On the downside, the main electric piano-esque melody never quite gets going and the beat's more minimal. It's easy to see why the final mix was chosen over this, but it's genuinely fascinating to hear how the track might have turned out. In an era where a piece can be continuously tweaked and edited on a computer, the idea of totally different takes being performed live in a studio has a real appeal, and tracks like this appearing from the archives give a wonderful idea of the development process Brian and Gaz went through to create pieces that now feel timeless. The Future Sound of London, Nemone's Electric Ladyland, 16th of April 2016. To celebrate the 25th anniversary reissue of Accelerator for 2016's Record Store Day, FSOL were invited to provide a mix for Nemone's Electric Ladyland show on BBC Six Music. Nemone's show was a major part of the national station's dance music output before she took over the Six Mix show a few years later. For this, FSOL created a mix largely based around tracks played on the 1993 Kiss FM transmissions, an unexpected turn in 2016 although totally in line with the Accelerator re-release. Ever diligent FSOL board member Pandemonium recorded the show and pieced it together to include all the introductory chat before the mix. Nemone gives a brief history of the band at the start and mentions it's their first BBC show for quite a few years. Let's get back on there again soon, eh guys? The show begins, of course, with Papua New Guinea, a nostalgic 1992 focus show where the band wouldn't, before throwing in 6 Kiss FM era favourites. Apex's Shotkey 7th Path features the I Want the Names of all the places you lived, all the schools you went to sample from 90s broadcasts at the start, and the It Calls Back a Time with her Flowers All Over the Earth silent running speech at the end, bringing back the early 90s feel once again. Sample from the 1994 Robert Sundell interview links the Apex track with the Red Cell one. Bass Cadet is the first appearance of an Autechre track in an FSOL mix, with a period appropriate piece. The only mention of Autechre before this was in the wonderfully in-depth Most Important Moments of a Life Mixmag interview in '96. Brian demonstrates his social interaction problem with a story about being recognised by one of Autechre in the shop Ambient Soho. It freaked him out and he rapidly left. The mix closes on an unreleased Views track, Viewed from the Outside, an alternate version of Viewed from an Obscure Angle with birdsong in the background. The Future Sound of London, the Electric Brainstorm's 11, Frisky Radio, 11th of December 2016. More than 2 years after the previous Electric Brainstorm and nearly 3 since the last full-length one, FSOL returned to Frisky Radio for the 11th volume in the series. Frisky was the broadcaster of the 3rd volume in 2008, the last time a full-length EBS mix was broadcast on the radio. After broadcast, a mini-site featuring the full tracklist was revealed, and the mix was later added to the FSOL Digital SoundCloud page. Rips from various sites have circulated as bootlegs. It opens with typical Electric Brainstorm environments, running water, whispering voices saying you are listening to the Electric Brainstorms, and so on. First track is an ambient dub remix of African group Achiza, immediately taking the mix in a slightly different direction to the more rural sound of most previous EBS transmissions.
At the moment there's certainly an increasing interest in electronic music, music that is produced by electronic oscillators.
Despite this old documentary sample, the mix continues in a similar vein with the next track, David Christian's isolationist dub track Want. The more world-sounding vibe is maintained with the new age flute music of Riley Lee. Some 1996 tour sounds appear at the top in a slightly jarring way. There follows one of those typical EBS sections where a bunch of obscure or unreleased tracks are all jammed together in a space of about 2 minutes. Given the lack of artist for the EMS track, the size of Soviet France's discography, the unreleased Z-Box track and the impossible to track down Lava Lava piece, I've made some guesses in the tracklist printed below that we'll have to do for now. A Richard Pinhouse track, first heard on Electric Brainstorm 4, takes us back to the 70s analogue synth route, before Control Bleeding offer a brief industrial moment. Up next is a track called Primal by AI, a totally unknown project at this point, and one that has remained obscure ever since. A collaboration between Brian Will White and Cranium Pie's Rob Appleton, they'd go on to release an overlooked album in 2017, as well as a collection of library music as Bug Beats, neither of which will feature this beautiful ambient track. The tone returns to 70s progressive electronica with Roger Powell before moving back to 60s tape music for Stockhausen's classic avant-garde composition Telemusic. At the top is a famous recording of an Art Bell radio show with him announcing a recording of what are supposedly sounds from hell. Sample ends with Bell saying what you're about to hear is very disturbing indeed, which leads beautifully into an unreleased humanoid piece, which itself acts as a great intro to the brilliantly odd Corvus by Silicugai. The first then exclusive FSOL track follows, viewed from Little Boats, at the time labelled as Little Boats by FSOL Pemberton. The second exclusive, an alternate version of Obelisk, continues and remains unreleased to this day. The next track is amusingly labelled Unknown Download. It's a quiet ambient piece with spoken word and saxophone samples from Eddie Harris's Infrapolations. After a brief snippet of German speech, the mix head back into IDM territory with a track by Rolf Funken. Digitana engineer Alina Kalancia is up next with something labelled as Lone MST Review. An unlisted, a somnambulant drift is played behind another barrage of answer phone messages, followed by a brief recording of Brian's father talking. After a brief snippet of the Z-Box track Wait, Mr. Choppy by avant-jazz duo Eyebrow starts from their Garden City album, CD copies of which were available through FSOL Digital for a while around this point. This is followed by Cynthia A's Wavelength, a very strange piece of experimental music with glockenspiel, drum fills and creepy voices speaking about going to number 3. The 1994 war on drugs environment is an unexpected callback with a very different mood to the usual EBS hauntology. The unreleased Yage track that follows sounds unlike any previous piece released under the name, with very little in the way of tribal percussion, instead focusing on warm drones and drum machines. A brief move away from FSOL comes in the form of the unsettling experimental jazz library music of Don Harper, or another Dougans Cobain exclusive, the 7-inch edit of Slider, created for a potential single in 1995. Imagine a multi-part single of Slider. Maybe we'll get a re-recorded one for a future record store day. The mix closes with the then unreleased Viewed from Pushkinova 7, followed by some reverse piano notes and the sound of a tape fluttering as it reaches the end of the spool. On the whole, I struggle with EBS 11 in a way I don't with the earlier volumes. All the key elements are there: analog synths, early electronics, modern classical sounds, some IDM, a few unreleased FSOL digital tracks, but it just doesn't quite gel in the way the earlier mixes do, making the contrasts between the tracks quite jarring at times. Perhaps it's the general lack of atmosphere or theme. There's definitely a bit less in the way of between track environments and recurring samples here, with answer phone messages being the source of many sounds, or just a larger number of modern tracks than normal. Either way, it's still a good mix, but it doesn't quite reach the bar set by the earlier examples of the series for me. The cover is a slight reworking of the Electric Brainstorm Document 8 cover, with the provided tracklist continuing the lo-fi DIY aesthetic of the EBS series, tracks cut and pasted onto an old sepia photograph. 2016 remixes, compilation tracks and production work. 2016 was the year the last Amorphous remixes and production jobs were released to date. In the more electronic end of things, further Yage remixes appeared, including one of a very surprising artist, and compilation tracks were provided to Touch Music once again, and detuned. Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds, El Mexicano, the Reflex La Revolución vocal mix. Released on El Mexicano, the Reflex La Revolución remixes. Great, a house remix of the Mexican, just what everyone wanted. Wonder how many Noel fans queued up for this on Record Store Day, only to listen to it once. Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds, El Mexicano, the Reflex La Revolución dub mix. A shorter version of the vocal mix, only including snippets of backing vocals instead of all the lyrics, which makes it slightly less awful, not having to hear the "you need love like a kid on crack" line. Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds, El Mexicano, the Reflex La Revolución instrumental. An instrumental version of the vocal mix, the last Noel and Amorphous related track to date. Although in the intervening years Noel claims to have found the album in his sock drawer, and Gaz has said he started looking at reworking the old tracks again, so if we're really lucky we could end up with another release like this one day. Barney Douglas and Ali Gavan, featuring Bess Atwell and Milo McKinnon, Butterfly King, the Amorphous Androgynous remix. Released on Warriors, original motion picture soundtrack. Between 2009 and 2016, the Amorphous Androgynous remix series lost a little bit of commercial momentum, with this final remix of the decade going somewhat under the radar. Forum member Ronxo stumbled across a page advertising the film's DVD release in January 2016 with a score featuring an Amorphous Androgynous remix. Described as a documentary of the story of how a group of young Maasai men use sport to end gender-based violence in their community, it seems like a pretty worthy project to be involved in. It's a shame more fans weren't made aware of the track. Once again, there was zero promotion from Gaz, Amorphous or FSOL. Butterfly King is a pleasant melancholic song based around a couple of acoustic guitar chords, some brass and a few lines of vocals. Brian and Gaz tease the dramatic parts of the track to the fore, adding in some big pounding drums, squelchy synths, guitar solos and other sounds, but not going overboard on the psychedelicization. Indeed, it sounds more like a very tasteful fleshing out of the original than a full-on remix, which is an unexpected but very welcome surprise. This would be the last Amorphous Androgynous material for nearly 4 years. Carbonax, Idiome, Yage Mind Maps Reimagining. Released on Snow Globe Citizen. The track opens with herringull and seashore sounds before heading into Dronia territory. The track continues in this direction throughout, with long sustained synth notes, the occasional splash of piano and a couple of choir sounds. A dark and sinister piece with a return to the modern classical leaning approach of the noughties and early 10s FSOL, with some similarity to Yage's Neotropic remix. According to the credits, this particular piece is a Brian solo track. Sick Ones, the Volition Yage remix. One member of hardcore punk band Sick Ones worked in Froome's post office, and after Brian had been in with stacks of FSOL digital orders on numerous occasions, asked him what kind of music he made. Friendship struck up, and the band asked Brian if there would be a possibility of a remix. And with FSOL always willing to go above and beyond, this remix came along with an entire EP remix and pieced together into an 8-minute track, described on the band's SoundCloud as the official Volition EP remix, cut and sewed by the legendary Yage, Amorphous Androgynous, Future Sound of London. Using these stems and sampling from hardcore trio Sick Ones, Yage has created a new blend of hardcore punk and experimental electronic music. It's a long way from what one would normally expect from a Yage remix, but works pretty well. The first section is fairly straightforward with a catchy riff and chunky breakbeats. This cuts out into birdsong and scream vocals as the second track comes in. It's far more electronic in approach. The original drums are heavily mangled with 303 lines. In keeping with the short blast structure of hardcore, this section is gone within just over a minute, and suddenly a new track starts with more screamed vocals and a simple drum line that fades out. He said things would get better, but they never did, screams the singer, and then it's into a much slower piece, much of the original track overlaid with reversed vocals and bizarre sounds, odd synth blasts. Vocals are distorted and filtered until completely indecipherable. The drums double in time for a few seconds, creating a bizarre drum and bass feel, and then it all cuts out for a recording of people walking along a corridor to the end. I was a bit of a hardcore fan in my early 20s and would probably have absolutely loved this at the time. I struggle with the vocals a little bit these days, but on the whole it's a really fun piece that doesn't sound really like anything else. It's really worth checking out as a totally different take on what the band can sound like. A hardcore punk soundscape isn't something you'll hear every day. The song can be downloaded directly from the Sick Ones SoundCloud. The credits state it's recorded by Sick Ones and torn apart by Yage. The Future Sound of London, Nightscape, released on Touched 3. Nightscape was first heard on the second Touched Music FSOL night in April 2016, announced to be the band's contribution to the third Touched compilation for McKinnon Cancer Support. This was given more gravitas with the reveal that it was being worked on when Brian discovered his father had terminal cancer. And what a tribute to his dad the piece is, an absolutely stunning track, one of the finest moments in the whole FSOL catalogue. Wistful piano chords, vast string sweeps, bittersweet synth arpeggios, a mid-tempo drum loop driving the piece forward, even some Lifeforms-esque gurgling sounds between the notes. With this mix of melancholia and hopeful sounds, it has an emotive feeling lacking in a lot of the weirder parts of the band's catalogue. But with its theme and sound, it could easily have found a home on Environment 5, which was being recorded around the same time as this. Instead, it makes a profound statement on this charity compilation. A video by Ann Carpendale and Dave Packer was uploaded to the Touched YouTube page to promote the album, being the first official FSOL video since 2001. Contrasting macro nature photography with cityscapes overlaid with digital glitches, it's an excellent summary of the 2010s era imagery of the band, though obviously lacks a little of the Buggy G Riphead magic. Nevertheless, it's a beautiful little video and worth a watch. I hope one day we get a release of all the band's compilation tracks, as pieces like this deserve a more solid place in the group's history. That said, reasonably priced with 417 tracks, including 7 by FSOL board members, the Touched 3 compilation is an incredible purchase in itself, funding a very worthy cause. The Future Sound of London, Obelisk, released on Brainbox. When Obelisk was first played on Touched Music FSOL Night 2 in April 2016, it sounded absolutely nothing like FSOL and was really exciting. By the time of its release that November, Environment 6 had already come out, and more on that in the next video, and the track's blend of melancholic synth arpeggios, clicking IDM-esque beats and wistful atmosphere was a very familiar sound. With its guitar, flute and vocal samples, it was a touch closer to Environment 6.5 than 6, but was clearly recorded during the same sessions as the two albums. It's one of my favourite tracks on the era and it's really worth checking out. It's the first collaboration between FSOL and Detuned Records, a relationship that will continue for many more years. Obelisk was the first original compilation track of the FSOL digital era to get a physical release. An alternate mix, Obelisk 2, was heard on the Electric Brainstorm's 11. And that's your lot for this week. I hope you enjoyed the video. Do leave me a comment down below, let me know what you think. Do let me know what you think of the music as well. There's some odd little moments in this, but yeah, let me know, especially if you've discovered this for the first time through the video. There's also like, subscribe, share, you know the deal by now. Next time we'll be looking at two lengthy related albums, Environment 6 and Environment 6.5. That promises to be quite a long video, so I really hope you'll join me for that. 2016 was the last year the Amorphous Androgynous remixes and production jobs got cool. Fucking hell. The mix closes with the then unreleased views from